Bienvenue.
I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 44 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. A few reminders. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. And the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee.
I think this is going to take very long, and I expect that it won't. A couple things that I need to start with. Don't start with me, Mr. Perron, with those signals over there. Okay, so a couple things. All of you have budgets. These are prepared budgets by the clerk. They are for the food inflation study, and they are for the Ukraine remission order, which was 2 meetings. I need a motion to have those adopted. This is administrative, but I would move that we make that happen. I would ask that someone in this group do it. Okay, I saw Mr. Steinley, second by Mr. McGregor, and I don't think we're going to have any issue. All in favor? Okay, great. Thank you, colleagues. Mr. Liu, I know you have a very quick point on the Minister of Immigration. And
Mr. Chairman, a quick question. The letter that was to be sent out to invite the Minister of Immigration to meet with the committee, has this letter been sent out? That was my first question. If yes, have we received an answer?
Just for the sake of efficiency, I'm going to respond in English. Yes, the letter has been sent. The clerk has made sure that that has gone. However, we don't know exactly what time the committees are going to sit in the new year. So the minister is in receipt of this, and I think we're waiting on seeing when exactly the committees are going to sit. But there's an open invitation for the minister to come in 2023. I'll let my clerk add anything additional if you feel it's necessary.
That's a pretty complete answer. As soon as I get the committee calendar for the new year, I will forward that to his office and await a response then. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et j'espère qu'on sera les premiers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I hope that we'll receive that visit.
Move to, of course, the bill that is before us today. That is, I'll read it off. Pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, November 2nd, 2022, the committee will commence clause by clause of Bill S-227, an act to establish Food Day in Canada. I would like to provide the members of the committee with some reminders on how we will proceed by clause by clause. I guess, Madam Clerk, I'll turn to you. I don't think there was any prepared amendments.
It's actually in your notes. Yeah.
Okay. Aucun amendement n'a été soumis pour les.
No amendment was submitted for consideration for this bill. If any amendments are proposed during the meeting today, they must be submitted in writing to the clerk of the committee.
On an amendment, members are permitted to move sub-amendments. These sub-amendments must also be submitted in writing. Une fois que tous les articles ont été mis en.
After all sections have been voted on, the committee will vote on the short title, the preamble, title, and the bill itself. If amendments are adopted, the committee shall issue an order to reprint the bill so that the House has an updated version at report stage.
To order the chair to report the bill back to the House. That report contains only the text of any adopted amendments as well as an indication of any deleted clauses. Thank you for, I was getting to work on my French. Thank you for that. So we also have with us today to answer any questions from the bill, Sophie Beecher, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Director General of Sustainable Development Policy, Directorate at Agriculture and Agri-Food. Welcome, and thank you for your work. So, I don't know if there's any amendments that are being proposed or any further discussion that is being required. So I think I can move, Madam Clerk, unless I am wrong, that pursuant to Standing Order 75-1, consideration of Clause 1 short title and of the preamble are postponed. The Chair calls Clause 2. So shall Clause 2 carry? Yes. Shall the short title carry? Yes. Shall the preamble carry? Yes. And shall the title carry? Yes. Wonderful. Colleagues, shall the bill, sorry, there are no amendments. Shall the chair report the bill back to the House? Yes. Shall the bill carry? My apologies. Yes. There's a lot of yeses here. So shall the bill carry? Yes. Okay, and I shall report that bill back to the House. So that is all we need, right, Madam Clerk?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The only other thing, is there anything else here?
No.
Condolence letter, colleagues, is all done. It's going to go out. it's very standard fare, but we're obviously, if you trust us, that'll be going out before Christmas. I think that you should have received a subcommittee letter. Here it is about travel. So if this is something we want to do in the new year, I think that's something we'll talk amongst our party leads in January about travel. So I'll leave it there. Mr. Parent, is it on this point or no? No. Okay, I'll come to you in a second.
Just the deadline is February 8th.
February 8th is the deadline. So, colleagues, if we want to arrange for committee travel, we have to get something into the liaison committee before February 8th. I leave it in the capable hands here of the room to decide in the lead up to February 8th if we'd like to make a submission and where we might like to go on the basis of our study. So I don't think there is anything else. I know Monsieur Parent has a question and a comment on how we're going to proceed on the Ukraine goods remission order. So I'll turn the floor to him.
En fait,
I see that on the agenda that we received, Mr. Chair, there was no item dealing with the Ukraine import item with respect to chicken imports. Have I misunderstood? If in our informal discussions we had discussed perhaps that we would follow through on this.
My understanding, and again, I'm glad you raised this point. You raised it kind of just after we had finished the last meeting. I think what I've heard from the groups, the folks that sit on this committee, is that we might want to ask the analysts to prepare a what we heard report, something that we could consider in January. And then we can have that discussion about what you want me to report back to the House. If we want to get into strong recommendations or something of that nature, I think it would be more appropriate to tackle that in January, the first meeting that we're back. And I think it would be the best to actually have the analysts prepare a summary of what we heard in those two meetings and proceed on that fashion. Now, in my conversations I've had with my colleagues in the House that sit on this committee, I think that's the best way to proceed, but I'm happy to hear what you have to say, Monsieur Parent. We had that conversation too, but over to you.
OK,
Well, certainly if we submit a report, that's fine, but it mustn't take too long. I had understood in our informal conversations that we could also send a more informal letter where perhaps we could include some general sense of what we've heard. But if we want to move ahead with official recommendations, I'm not opposed. Perhaps my colleague, Mr. Imu, would like to comment. Yes, please go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the same topic, I think we can also wait to see what our analysts propose to us in terms of recommendations. But we're faced with a fait accompli, that is a decision that's already been made after the fact. I believe, well, I had prepared a letter that I drafted in my office in both languages, and I'd like us to write both to the Minister of Finance, Freeland, and Minister of Agriculture, Bibeau, to share with them. That is, I won't qualify this, but rather to let them know that this agreement was granted the day after we had completed our analysis. This was a major surprise for me, and perhaps I'm too new in committees, but when we have this kind of committee, generally, the idea is to inform and then to take into account all of the factors. I have a letter that we prepared which makes a number of recommendations, but they're not so broad because at the end of the day, we're faced with the after-the-fact situation. And yes, and CFIA has mentioned an issue here as well. But at this point, I would be prepared to table the letter, Mr. Chair, and I'd like this letter to be conveyed to the Ministers of Finance and Agriculture as soon as possible. I understand that this can also be done as we return end of January. However, I think it would be relevant for us to address this issue immediately. It's still in everybody's mind. We heard our witnesses end of November. That's not only been 2 weeks ago. So I would suggest, in fact, I have copies that I could give to the clerk. I don't know if you'd like to take cognizance of this and discuss it. I think it would be relevant that we indicate to the two ministers what our view is.
So I will go to Mr. Drouin, but just let me comment, Mr. Liu, on I think the best course of action. You, of course, as a member of Parliament, can choose to send that letter to our requisite ministers at any time and publish that either publicly or write that to them. And indeed, you can ask any one of these members across the table to add their signature to the said letter. I think it's most appropriate for this committee to allow the analysts to do their work. And as we come back in January, because of course we can't table anything in the House. The House is just adjourned this afternoon, so there will be no reporting back to the House in terms of what this committee might think as a consensus. I think we should leave that to January to decide if we want to just table what we heard report or whether or not we'd like to have more stringent recommendations. And I think that's ultimately a debate that is going to take perhaps an hour or two. But what you are proposing, you can do individually as a member, and you can, in fact, ask other members to do the same with you. But Mr. Drouin, maybe you had the same thought, but I'm going to go to you.
Oui, juste,
And I welcome the efforts made by my colleague, but the committee parliamentary is not here to approve or disapprove any imports or exports. That is not our role, whether this be at the International Affairs Committee or elsewhere. It is not necessarily within our purview. When the government makes a decision, of course, we can speak to the issues. But with all due respect for Mr. Liu, he wrote a letter. The letter has not been submitted, and we are going to object to this letter. However, what I would propose to Mr. Liu on behalf of the Agriculture Committee is that we don't agree, but if he would like to send a letter with signatories from other members, he is free to do so. Given that if he believes that this is an issue that must be put forward quickly, he's free to do so. But usually we would ask the analysts to write the letter to ensure that there isn't any bias in this letter.
It's the best course of action. Mr. Parent, I do see your hand, but Mr. Liu, I think what I would suggest to you is that you can certainly table that with us. I do think that we're still need to go through our analysts, and we'll come back and have the proper debate on January 30th, assuming that will be our day, perhaps, if it's continuing to be on a Monday. And then we can decide where we want to go as a consensus as a committee. But you're right in terms of the rapid nature. If you want to table that or make sure that that is sent to the ministers, you can do so right today and using your parliamentary privilege. Monsieur Parent.
Oui, ben,
Well, to come back to what I was about to say, I would like the members of the committee to take the time to review this draft letter. We can also put forward some amendments to it. If you would like to include this in the material sent to the analyst, I do think the message will carry more weight if it were put forward by the committee. I think in terms of what Mr. Liu has expressed in the letter is something I concur with, but there is a way of framing this so that everybody agrees. But there is a means of sending it, whether we send it now or in January. Well, perhaps that won't change much, given that the decision was made while we were working on the item. Nevertheless, I think it's important that the committee members express some disappointment and perhaps some bitterness, even with respect to how important the work is, their work is for them, even though not all has been decided, and they know that some issues are within their jurisdictions and other not. I think there's a minimum of consideration that needs to be placed with vis-a-vis the work done here, because we took the time, it took time. So I believe that Mr. Liu's message is quite important. What I wish to say, Mr. Chair, is that I tabled a document to Madam Clerk, and I have copies for you today. But if we are going to charge the analyst to come back to us with proposals, I won't necessarily distribute this, but I did distribute what we heard in the committee, which I believe we should retain, and I think it's admissible. I've already submitted this to the clerk. If you're interested in receiving this, I do have copies available, and I would like us to look at it. And I would invite the members of the committee to consider this message. We are, after all, a consensus-based committee. It's great. And it's always more productive when everybody carries the message. But again, it's up to the members of the committee to make that decision, whether we debate now or not.
Colleagues, I'll go to Mr. Drouin.
écoute, tout respect que j'ai, c'est que le problème, c'est qu'on a...
with all due respect, is that we have not given any directions to our analyst. And today, both of you have made recommendations regarding these letters, and it's different whether it's recommendation or report. The procedure is different. And no directions came from the committee. We did not receive a motion from the committee to table a letter to the ministers. It's simply a matter of procedure. If you would like to send this before December 31st, what I would suggest is that no motion has been adopted at all. So unless you would like to discuss this for 2 hours now, what I would propose is that do what you feel is required, and I respect you for this. But on our side, you do have a job to do, and I respect that. But we just received the letters, so we can't take a quick off-the-cuff decision, and it's a matter of process. And again, if in January it still remains an issue, we will address this in January. But if Mr. Louis would like to send this prior to Christmas, again, I can't prevent him from doing it.
So, okay, I will go to you, Mr. Liu, but what I would suggest to this committee is somewhat along the lines of what Mr. Drouin has suggested, which is this is coming a little bit late, of course, in the session. I certainly, as a chair, respect your sense of duty to make sure that you're raising this issue. As I've already noted, you can do so today with the click of a button by sending that to our ministers and making sure that that is well heeded and well heard. But as it relates to the committee itself, I would respectfully suggest that this committee follow the advice of Mr. Drouin and we actually come back in January and study this. I think we should give the direction to our analysts to prepare largely a summary of what we've heard. And then if we feel necessary to put some prescriptive recommendations or harder language around that, let's do that in January. Let's do that when we come back, when we've had the time to both digest both of your letters and also what the analysts have prepared in terms of a summary. But Mr. Liu, you want to make a quick point.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With all due respect to my colleague, Mr. Drouin, I'd like us to acknowledge and that we respect the work that this committee conducts. Without being partisan, I sit around here at the table as a member, but to represent the agricultural setting where we were practically targeted here, we heard very complete testimonies from the Department of Finance on the non-analysis of the impact that this might have. So I find it a bit odd, although I understand how the committee conducts its work, but I wanted to share with the committee that I find this a bit odd, how this issue was addressed. We've taken the time to welcome people here and to listen to them, which some persons should have done. So it won't prevent me from sending my letter. I'm fully aware of this. However, once you will take cognizance of it, you'll see that there's nothing partisan in it at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Liu, and certainly part of the dynamic where we are at today is the actual order that was passed, or the motion, I should say, from Mr. Barlow originally was not really prescriptive of what the committee was to do after the two meetings. So obviously, we're now starting to come to frame what we should do. And with your request, and I think what my clerk is trying to get a clarification on is, are we instructing the analyst to go away and prepare a letter, a summary of what we heard, and then when we come back in January, we can take that summary and choose to put in more language if we want to either report back to the House, here's what we heard, and we'd ask the government to consider what the stakeholders have told us, or whether or not that includes more prescriptive recommendations, which this committee is going to have to agree. I really don't think we're going to get to that point here today, and I would ask this committee's direction to tell the analyst to prepare that letter for our consideration for the first meeting back in January, and we will tackle it at that time. Is that a pathway, colleagues, that we can agree on? Yep. Okay. Okay. Other than that, I don't have any other business, colleagues, and I would like, with your blessing, to wish you all a Merry Christmas, a Happy Holidays, and a happy and prosperous New Year, and we'll see you back in action in 2023. Okay, wonderful. Enjoy your Christmas. Merry Christmas.